Hello everyone! With days to go before Election Day, the Democrats and the Republicans have been fiercely campaigning, especially in key Senate races. Today I'm joined by Peter Como, Director of Percipient Strategies, to give you our final Senate predictions. Enjoy.
In terms of recent trends, obviously Republicans have been picking up a lot of steam lately, but it's important to remember that just a couple of months ago, this is more or less what polls are showing as well. Obviously, the past couple of months, it looked like Dems might be able to hold on to the House, maybe the Senate, and then, reality kind of set back in. There's a pretty obvious correlation between, the major indicators of what's going to drive polls up and down, and that's typically inflation, gas prices, and the general economic state. And it seemed like things were cooling off for a little bit. Obviously, that had a lot to do with, the Biden admin releasing a lot of oil from the strategic reserve, as well as, some other policies that had been implemented. The Fed played a role as well. But all of those, were at least gave the impression that, the economy was starting to level off. Obviously, things have come back down to reality, and I think a lot of people are looking at their wallets and they're saying, where did all of this money go? And they're looking for somebody to blame, which is why I think you're seeing this major shift back towards Republicans.
Right, and how do you think abortions could have played in political trends so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a really hotly contested topic. Early on, it seemed like that was going to be a pretty big decider, in some of the races. And that was, again, as I had alluded to earlier, when it seemed like the economic situation had cooled off a little bit. Now it seems like people are a lot more concerned with how they're going to pay their bills, their mortgage, rent, whatever it may be. And it seems like it's taken, the back seat. If you look at polls on what the majority of Americans are most concerned about, what independent voters, which are obviously going to swing this election, are most concerned about, it comes back down to the three things that I had said earlier: inflation, the basic economic state that we're in, and price of gas. So it doesn't seem like it's going to be that much of a factor. Now, I could be wrong, but just based off of, the polls that we've been seeing, especially lately, it seems like, the amount of money in people's wallets is what's going to drive them to the polls and make them decide how they want to vote.
Absolutely. So let's start with the first race. This is the most probably talked about race in every Senate race so far, and that's Pennsylvania. So we have Democrat John Fetterman going up against Republican Dr. Oz in this hotly contested race. So what's the general gist there? What's the general situation there so far?
Yeah, I mean, over the past couple of weeks, it seems like there's been a huge surge for Dr. Oz. After he won the primary, it seemed like, this always happens when there's a hotly contested primary where there's a known candidate on one side and there's a lot of baggage on the other side. But Dr. Oz came out of the primaries looking like, something like 38% to Fetterman's, 60 plus, whatever it was originally. And obviously that gap has really narrowed, and polls, especially in the past couple of weeks, like I just said, are actually showing that he's leading in several of them. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with, the issues that Dr. Oz has really been hitting him on, which are crime, which is fracking, jobs, the economy, and that he would be a rubber stamp for the Biden admin, which to this point, I think most people can agree, has not done a good job.
Absolutely. And how do you think the debate affected Oz's surge in polling?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the ability to serve in office is incredibly important. I think that voters have been seeing that, obviously a little bit on the news, and the reality of it is that, the CNNs, the MSNBCs, they're not going to highlight the fact that John Fetterman really has struggled recovering from his stroke. But to that fact, Dr. Oz has shown that he can actually be relatable to voters in Pennsylvania. And I think that all of these issues roll into, how they perceive their preferred candidate. And the swing voters are looking at, John Fetterman and saying, can he actually serve in the Senate if he gets there? And what's he going to be like if he is a U.S. Senator that is representing me from the state of Pennsylvania? And so because of that, I think that, especially after the debate performance, which was pretty abysmal, I think a lot of voters are looking at it and seeing Dr. Oz as being, a candidate that they could get behind.
What are your final predictions?
Yeah, I think if you asked me maybe a month and a half ago, I would have said it's anyone's guess. But I think that Fetterman would pull it out because I think that Josh Shapiro is a pretty strong candidate at the top of the ticket for him. But right now, I think that Dr. Oz has a pretty good chance to, the percentages on it, I have no idea. I could see it being anywhere from, a couple, tens of thousands of votes to being, hundreds of thousands of votes. It's really hard to say because, again, I do think that we're going to be seeing a huge red wave, across the country here. But to what extent is hard to say right now. But I do think that Dr. Oz will be winning.
Mm-hmm. So next state we're going to go to is New Hampshire. So in New Hampshire, we have Republican Don Bolduc versus Democrat Maggie Hassan. It's been getting more nationwide attention recently because Don Bolduc's been surging in the polls, and so far he's been basically catching up to Maggie Hassan and the RCP average. So maybe give us more context behind, why is this surge happening for Don Bolduc, and are the same issues that are playing across nationwide applying here as well?
Yeah, I think, like you had just said, I think that a lot of the issues that you're seeing in states like Pennsylvania are also very prevalent in New Hampshire, and it's hard to separate, specific candidates from issues that, their party is also struggling to defend their positions on. So I think that this surge that we're seeing is in large part due to the general sentiment that people are feeling, the general sentiment that independent voters are seeing and feeling when they answer these poll questions about how they feel, and they're unhappy and they're very dissatisfied with how Democrats have run the country for the past 2 years. And I think that they want change, and whether or not, that comes in the form of a Don Bolduc or a Dr. Oz or any of these other candidates, I think that they're looking for somebody who can maybe bring a fresh perspective or somebody who's going to try and get spending in check.
I guess Joe Biden has won the state of New Hampshire by 7 points. What do you think he's running on that makes him different from, say, a Donald Trump, for example, in New Hampshire?
Yeah, I think that Don Bolduc is a pretty Trumpian candidate, to be honest. I think that he's, running on the same types of principles, but I think that a lot of conservatives across the country are running on the same thing, where it's personal freedom, personal responsibility. We're going to try and stay out of your life as long as, you don't do anything to affect our life in a negative way. Everyone just wants to try and build a prosperous future for themselves and for their family, and it's hard to do that when you have a lot less money in your wallet. I think, again, this just comes down to truthfully the amount of money that Dems have been spending without even realizing that how much it's going to affect really these hardworking, middle-class, independent voters who are going to send them packing, in a couple of days because they're unhappy with how they've been handling it. So, to answer your question, I think that he's running on largely the same tenets that most conservatives are running on across the country. I think that, Maggie Hassan, who's been in the Senate for, a little while now, they look at her as an incumbent, someone who's kind of a swamp creature, if you will, and they think we want somebody different. And here's, Don Bolduc, who's this outsider, who's this, not political person. I know that he's run in the past, but I think he's done a good job of trying to, paint himself and portray himself as being this, outside figure, much like Trump did in 2016.
So what's your, I know a lot of people have said that, it's really hard to, win New Hampshire, but personally, from what I've seen, I think that they do have a real chance here so far, if not, winning 54 Senate seats with New Hampshire. So what are your final predictions for New Hampshire?
Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I do think that it's hard to beat an incumbent, and I think that Maggie Hassan is pretty well liked in the state. I don't know, polls that come out that show a gigantic increase for one candidate out of nowhere they're hard to judge, and I know that, the RCP averages have been moving up. But truthfully, I'm not entirely sure that Don Balda can pull it out. I would be surprised if he did. But then again, I do think that we're going to be seeing a huge red wave come across, in a couple of days. And it's anybody's guess, but I guess I would honestly put it to a toss-up. It's impossible to say. I think that, unfortunately, and when it comes to like a toss-up, incumbents have a pretty good chance. But then again, we're seeing a lot of resentment towards, especially, lifelong, politicians, Dems. So it's anybody's guess, to be honest.
All right, so now we're moving on to the state of Georgia. That's definitely more high profile than New Hampshire, I'd say. So Herschel Walker now leads in the RCP average over by approximately, say, 1 to 2 points. Maybe lead us into this by telling us about the effects of the abortion allegation that happened pretty recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think for somebody like Herschel Walker, who has a lot of character flaws that have come out, and obviously he attributed a lot to, playing football and these head injuries. I don't think that the abortion issue for Herschel Walker is going to change people's minds at the end of the day. I think that people understand who Herschel Walker is, and they're going to vote for him because they want him in the Senate. I don't think that his personal issues are going to change people's minds who are going to vote for him. Now, independent voters may be changing their mind, but again, it kind of comes back to what we had opened with, or what you had opened with, where, you asked me about how prevalent, abortion is of an issue, in the midterms. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the amount of money that people have in their wallets, crime, as well as, just issues that are affecting people's families. And I don't think that Herschel Walker potentially, again, these are all allegations, having paid for an abortion is going to sway voters in the way that I think a lot of pundits think that it is.
Absolutely, and I think, if I remember correctly, Raphael Warnock also has a fair slew of allegations. So I think, if I remember correctly, it was a situation where he ran his wife or ran like his wife's foot with a car or something. Yeah,
there was some body cam footage that came out during the runoff election, or maybe before the runoff, but in the 2020 cycle, where he had apparently run over, or his wife claimed that he had run over his wife's foot. And again, it's Raphael Warnock is a flawed candidate as well, on top of just these domestic issues that had got brought up last cycle. There are new allegations that came out, I think, in the past couple of weeks, if not, a month ago, where Raphael Warnock is a pastor and his church owns an apartment building, an apartment complex. And I believe in the story, it was that this apartment complex was trying to evict its tenants during COVID, which is a pretty hard sell, especially, as a pastor, and he's the head of the church. So, again, he's not this, impervious candidate where everything just kind of washes off of him. I think that voters pay attention to it maybe a little bit more because he is a pastor. So maybe people do hold him to a little bit of a higher standard. But then again, I think that Herschel Walker has his own baggage. But I think that voters knew most of that coming into it. He coasted through the primary because people view Herschel as the son of Georgia because he was, this incredible football player, and he's done a lot for the community, especially with veterans. And I think that he's a known entity, so I don't think that these new allegations are going to sway people who were thinking about voting for him one way or another, because at the end of the day, he's Herschel to them. I don't think that changes anything. With Senator Warnock, he has his own fair share of issues. Like you had said, there was, a domestic issue with his now ex-wife or wife, I'm not entirely sure. But then again, his church, which he is the pastor of, owns an apartment building, and they were trying to evict tenants during COVID, which I think is also a pretty hard sell. I don't know how you can tell, these hardworking people who may have been facing their own financial issues during COVID, that, this supposedly forgiving, religious, caring figure, his apartment complex was trying to evict other people from their homes during a time of incredible uncertainty. So, again, I think that personal issues will play a role in it, but I think less so for Herschel.
What are your final predictions for this one?
Yeah, I mean, again, same thing where I think if you had asked me maybe a month or two ago, I would have said that Senator Warnock will probably eke it out. But again, I think that at the end of the day, Georgia's a pretty red state, and there's this gigantic red wave coming. So I think that, Herschel pulls it out. I think it'd be, if I had to put a number on it, I would say maybe 1 to 2 points. I do think that he will get helped by having Governor Kemp at the top of the ticket because, he's done a fantastic job throughout COVID and has really been able to, stand out among other governors during COVID. And on top of that, I think that Governor Kemp will pull up Herschel as opposed to Stacey Abrams, who's going to weigh down, oh my God, Senator Warnock. Sorry. Lost my train of thought there for a second. But I do think that Herschel will pull it off.
So another underrated race that we haven't talked about so far is Nevada, with Republican Adam Laxalt slightly ahead of Catherine Cortez Masto. Nevada looks very safe for Republicans, or at least leans Republican, and most Democrats in the state look incredibly vulnerable. Tell us why that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, there's a lot of enthusiasm among Republicans, and I think that is kind of squeezed onto the independent voters as well. I think, especially across the state, one of the big things that is probably underreported on is that Nevada has a huge Hispanic population, and trends over the past couple of years, especially, just the past year or two, have shown that a lot of Hispanic voters have been changing to more conservative views. And I think a lot of that is because, the Dems have kind of gone crazy, and, the term Latinx or Latinx or whatever it is has offended a lot of them. I mean, the Laxalt campaign put out an ad specifically highlighting that, which I think will resonate with a lot of Hispanic voters. And to that point, I think that that's probably what is going to be the biggest change in the electorate and what's going to sway the election in a lot of elections in Republicans' favor.
One of the issues that makes the Nevada Senate race more notable, I guess, in many aspects, is the issue of COVID. That's been an incredibly hot topic in the state of Nevada. So how is the Laxalt campaign kind of putting their campaign ahead of Masto in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, most people, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, are kind of ready to get past COVID. In a state like Nevada, which relies heavily on the tourism industry and bringing people in to their state, it's hard because COVID really decimated the state, especially in Las Vegas, which obviously relies a ton on tourism. But on top of that, I think the Laxalt campaign has been doing what most Republicans have been doing nationwide, which is, look, like we're the party of individual freedom. My opponent and other Democrats have been trying to keep you shuttered in your home, sheltered businesses, and haven't given you the opportunity to, live your life. If you want more of that, then vote for them. But if you want to get back to trying to get back to normal life, then vote for us. And I think that that's the sentiment across, the country with Republicans. But in Nevada especially, I think it's really hard to vote for the people who have been keeping kids out of schools, who have been imposing mandates, mask mandates, whatever it is, which is why I think that the Laxalt campaign probably, or very much so, has the advantage on that issue.
All right. So what's your final prediction here for Nevada?
Yeah, I mean, I think even when it seemed like Democrats were maybe going to, tighten the races, I think that the Laxalt campaign has been ahead in just about every poll. So I think that it's a very likely win for the Laxalt campaign.
State we're going to be talking about is Ohio, with Republican J.D. Vance and Democrat Tim Ryan. So, as you know, Ohio voted for Trump close to 7 to 8 points, when most polling suggested that Biden would win by a incredibly significant margin. Yet this time around, polling only shows Vance leading by around 2 points here. So, as I mentioned before previously with Pennsylvania, polling has been incredibly unreliable so far in the Rust Belt. So, do you think that the polling could be underestimating Vance, or perhaps even overestimating Vance? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Ohio is a really wonky state when it comes to polling. Like you had just said in 2020, but again, a lot of pollsters got 2020 wrong. But in 2020 they had Biden winning by, a huge margin. I think some polls had him up, by like 10 points or so. But Ohio, again, since 2016 has been a largely Republican state. So I think that the Vance campaign, I don't know how many internal polls they released, but I would assume that their internals probably have them ahead by at least a couple of points, whether that's 2 or more. It's hard to say, but I do think that the polling in Ohio is difficult, but it is becoming a red state at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Right, and how has Vance improved his funding in the state? Before, Vance had significant issues with funding, but recently with help from Mitch McConnell and the Senate leadership PAC, Vance has definitely improved his funding a little bit more. Can you add a bit more depth on that, or why that's happened?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like you had said, I think after he won the primary, he struggled quite a bit with fundraising. And I think that was in large part because his primary win, a lot of it was attributed to the contributions that Peter Thiel had made to his campaign to get him across the finish line. But I think that the McConnell leadership PAC, the Senate leadership PAC, has contributed close to $30 million to his campaign. So while his individual fundraising may be lagging behind a little bit, McConnell and his team have really been working hard to keep it competitive because Tim Ryan has really been able to raise quite a bit of money, but he's had to spend it just as fast because these outside groups on top of the McConnell leadership PAC have really been flooding the state with a lot of ads. So I think that he's gotten a huge boost from leadership within the Senate because they realize that they can hold the seat, and they absolutely want to do that.
Mm-hmm. And why is, I guess we're going to move on to the other candidate, which is Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan's been more of a moderate on the issues, I'd say, as a Democrat candidate. So is he trying to not separate himself from Joe Biden, or in general, what's his strategy in regards to the issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's absolutely trying to separate himself a little bit from Biden. He's a very unpopular person in the state currently and across the nation, obviously. But Tim Ryan has voted with Pelosi. If I had to guess, it would be in the high 90s while he was in the House. And again, anything that happens in the House, at least in the past 2 years, comes directly from the Biden admin. They're not going to push legislation through that Joe Biden doesn't approve of or his admin doesn't approve of. But to that effect, I think he's trying to separate himself from Biden specifically because of how people are disappointed with Biden over the past 2 years and how unhappy they are with his policies. So Tim Ryan is really trying to make himself sound like a moderate, much like a lot of Democrats are across the country right now, even though they've taken these incredibly liberal positions in the past. I mean, just kind of going back to Pennsylvania for a second, you look at the issue of fracking with John Fetterman, for example, where in 2016 when he was running for Senate originally, he said that, he wanted to ban fracking. And then now in 2022, when he's running for Senate again, completely, different tune where he's saying that he does support fracking, or I'm assuming that's what he said. It was really hard to decipher, but they have completely changed their positions on these major issues because they realize that a large demographic of their potential voters are supportive of these issues, whether that's, law and order, whether that's crime, whether that's immigration, whatever it is. You can see them really starting to come back to the median of voters on these issues and what the average voter thinks on these, important social issues.
Right, and so going back to the polling question, I've heard a lot of other Republican analysts, and they're saying Tim or J.D. Vance will win close to around 9 points, which I'm not exactly too sure if that's a real possibility, but your thoughts on whether or not Vance could actually, or has a good chance of winning by close to 9 points or even more than that, possibly?
Yeah, I mean, again, the polls are always really hard. It's hard to rely solely on the polls, as we've seen over the past, decade or so, where, a lot of the polls have been wrong in a lot of key states. But I think the Vance campaign did something very important in the past couple of months, which is introduce his wife more. His wife is a very successful woman in her own right, and when you introduce a wife to the campaign, it shows, at the end of the day, it's trying to make you more approachable and raise your approvals and try and drop your disapprovals, which is obviously why they brought her out. When he had won the primary, he really was struggling with, his popularity. And that alone, I think, has really done a number for him in terms of making him more appealable to these independent voters who may have looked at him and been like, I don't want to vote for him, but he's actually, he could be this, thoughtful person. He could be this senator who does care about the individual voter and not just his bottom line. To say that he's going to win by, maybe 10 points, I have no idea. I do think that, I'm assuming your next question is going to be, what do I think? I think that he does win the seat. I think the Republicans hold the seat, but I have no idea if it's going to be as wide of a margin as some polls are saying.
Philip with Percipient Strategies Director Peter Como. It's been incredibly amazing talking to you, Peter, and I really loved your analysis here today. Yeah,
really appreciate you having me on, and looking forward to seeing how accurate I am with these predictions.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see. And if you want to hear more, we have weekly episodes every week, and if you enjoyed, please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. As always, guys, peace.